Hello, Americans, people over the world. I want to speak to you about forgiveness because, by the way, nature teaches us to show us that where it is value to forgive and not to forgive simultaneously. But tactical ulterior from how we have been appreciating the simultaneous. For example, the only way to discern the breaching method that was behind that is one of the values. A breaching method is one of the values. A human fact, true nature breaching method is one of the values that the laws that were entrenched before America's founders were born. They were value as. It was recorded as a fact, true nature, torture, extortion, and slavery method of everyone. But to discern that method and to speak about it properly, the discernment of it comes through the collusions with itself that no one wanted, but it only allowed that. Like, for example, the educators of science, the people of sciences, had obligations to have discerned by everyone the difference between what they labeled as an Uncle Tom, hyper additionally from what the author Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe House and Mark Twain House increasingly involved with the Connecticut Capitol, used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought black pupils. There was slavery entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies, and in Hartford, and for Connecticut, where in ways our founders communicated for us. James Madison's plan is what forced the North and South to fight against slavery, with the subject incapable of no one's allowed to have free speech on the subject is critical of slavery. We don't have free speech. This and still there are rules with everyone's speech is an extent of collusion against everyone else. Otherwise, that body is sensed, including if that body is a majority of people, including if that body is everybody, and that is adapted to, including if it is any grouping of countries that comes while our locations, areas, and states still have fact, should be equality aspects and nature relative. Like someone said, oh, forgiveness, make it one thing. Everything's about the appreciating the simultaneous. And so we could discern the hyper simultaneous because it is distinctly the simultaneous from how it is distinctly the order of the finite or the finite details. It is the difference of that. It is that identity of relativity that has every species body everywhere where they are. We know that they know the extent of the past is already true here now. It's still true here now. And we know extent of truth here now. We know that there's one identity of truths. That is the difference between that we know active group and that we don't know active group. And there's of the past that we don't know about, that we know that too. But there's the part of the past that we know that were truths that were true all the way. And then we know that the value of the seasons here now. But see, now we know it through systems that can't afford to have the simultaneous / hyper simultaneous as itself, as that identity that is not the other species' bodies. It is not our species' body, but it is everything anyway. Hear many pray, vaccines. So forgiveness is because is important for science, and the opposite to be inseparable, and the nature is important too. See, we have all three being and having been for a bit by the people who made subject treatments together as countries A through Z, having blamed other things, others, ourselves for what the breaching method originally caused. And that's being self-valued, but people are only capable of doing that now, and or of being roles, needs, and nature sensing for the breaching method. Anybody, including as a majority of people, including as everyone. You know, they're trying to change and fake everyone's words, styles, roles, and pretend that's not evidence too. Ugh. In other words, so the discernment nature shows us means to discern a breaching method, but means to discern that breaching method is by searching where and how there are collusions. We have black people's rights of eyes to discern other things, others ourselves are forced and have been forced blamed for how a breaching method reassigned, what nature communicates when nature is not as criminal insidious in its nature. And nature itself shows us the difference between criminal insidiousness natures of positives treatments and negative treatments per part of how nature shows us how it values what is simultaneously, distinctly from what is hypersimultaneous. And it values the slash part between what is simultaneous slash hypersimultaneous. The slash part is the value of our nature used to check, to contemplate. See, but now everyone uses nature like passions and emotions for and through systems tactical ulterior from what could afford to have discerned the difference between the smallest finite detail or the order of the finite, the difference between what is active grouped relativity. We are human species body, individual body of individual bodies with all group differences being generated in the demonstration of the hyperdifference. That one again, that identity of value / value progression. That is not our species body. It is not the other species body, but it is all things anyway, even if they are made up. Its particular hypervolume science is not only inseparable from all parts of those things, but from the order of the finite. And from the finite, well, as them, well, not, but anyway, as the difference of that. People can't be honest about the beginning of the Old Testament, which says only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together, and the part that comes before it. And that is the part before the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and with Adam and Eve and their generation, with those spellings of those names, unusual names. So, in other words, people can't be honest about that part either. They can't be honest about the part, and they can't be honest about the difference. And that's forced by nature itself, where how there are three distinct parts of the individual, hyper invisible, but still discernible. It also has distinct, hyper invisible, but still discernible parts of itself. See the word part inside the participle nature, which are names hyper additional for a verb. Because identity is volume science, even anything made up, even art, has its identity of volume progression, the identity of all space / existence. Inseparable not only from all parts of that, what's made up or and from what is real, but from the parts of it distinctly, non-distinctly, simultaneously / hyper simultaneously, per how it is functional, being a distinct identity of hyper invisible, but still discernible. That can be used to show too the different agencies and the branches of government, like the military, is used self-valued remotely, criminally, foreign influence, tactically, delusions, raw. Otherwise, that body is sensed, including if they are a majority of people, including if they are everybody. Foreign and domestic military colluded with Connecticut, interstates and internationally, per also further hyper-international, not only is nature's identity, there was an identity of collusions. This is only one, in other words, like the foundation of the suits and ties counters an exception, where that is brought with relativity, with subject treatments, like the subject treatment of forgiveness. Forgiveness, if there was a predicate acts with facts method, I'm not even a lawyer. That's another one of the things that those laws were manifest as predicate acts with facts against humanity method and pretending other collusion / S role self-value to an extent. Otherwise, that body would be sensed. again, including if that body was a majority of people, including if it was everybody. And see, rolls with that system, whereas all locations, areas, and states. Now, styles, qualities, aspects, natures of fact treatment, nature that any leader they come to positions, they find that and how they've been used remotely, not just used remotely, criminally foreign influence / hypercriminally foreign influence, but self-valued that way. Not even discerning to an extent. There is identity of pseudo sophistication. So I was speaking about forgiveness, and then President / Chief Biden, I saw right in the news he was getting angry about we're not sophisticated, and I understand. I forgive because I understand why he would say that. But how could we pretend? How could they pretend they have sophistication? They don't even have the black people's rights of eyes. They have James Madison's communications. For example, there is inside the communications of James Madison, a human fact tribute nature breaching method is a scientific value that he and the founders behind him communicated, that they didn't have free speech to communicate about. They declassified this to us. There were crazy laws against everyone entrenched, and roles with that had been sustained since semi-ancient times. And that caused and causes all kinds of things, but also fact tribute nature quality aspects in nature that could be and are used remotely, criminally forward influence, tactically delusions raw, and roles self-valued. Otherwise, that body is sensed. Not self-valued collusion /S with the breaching methods use /uses of that. And even though the polar parts are everyone else, the uses that's hiding behind and through that. In other words, forgiveness is because to discern the breaching method as a scientific value, as one of the things that is true always, all those crazy laws, sickly distinctly against everyone, like with the black and white, northern colonies and southern colonies that was entrenched. That is not clear because no one has heard honesty about what caused the Civil War, because you have that replaced from what James Madison and our founders communicated, which is also, you guys have self-valued roles with uses of what they say, pretending dishonestly not to be able to fathom how everyone's speech was forced to be collusion /S against everyone else to an extent. Otherwise, they would be sensed, including if they were a leader of a people, including if they're a leader of a grouping of countries trying to counter all this caused and keeps, as long as their locations, areas, and states are what really and why really, how really suits and ties, counters, and exception. Got away with pretending they could speak for honesty or truth. And having had this left out, because nature itself would have shown you don't leave out how we have black people's whites of eyes and the breaching method. It's supposed to be, in other words, and you guys are changing and faking what people say about critical things. They've been stacking, faked, and changed evidences at campuses. The counters to the sexual predators, and it's proof that there are sexual predators with the transsexual community, because they have collusions with differences rackets with some KKK black theme, Confederate flag theme, and counters. In other words, they've been speaking about hate dishonestly as collusion /S with the differences racket. We have the same color eyes, different color eyes at the same time. And nature's teaching us about difference there. In other words, they're changing and faking what people say on a mass scale. There are formal delusions. There are overt criminal enterprises, delusions, and criminally foreign influence, fact tribute quality aspects of nature. Distinct, they're also valuing their differences. Also, even when they're not even in the same cases. Because the breaching method propagated styles, needs, and natures of criminal insidiousness, natures of positive treatments and negative treatments, collusion /S, self-valuing, and need to self-value increasingly. rolls with the breaching method with that, having used that remotely. Oh, but that's not our fault. We couldn't control the campuses that were already there that way, teaching people. All we have to do is follow mandated law. The sciences are recorded themselves standing, self-valued, having been too, while they're trying to defend themselves. The only way they're allowed to be capable of it. Otherwise, that body is censored, including if it's a majority of people, including if it's everyone. See how they have things debatable about the money. Nature itself shows us there's a reason. It's the reason why money and value, why there are two different, and resources, why there are three different words. For example, and nature shows us that nature is a word that we need to use hyper additionally for the word identity. Because again, there's that identity that nobody is, but everything can't help but being it anyway. And we can ignore its system, that hyper-native pure, but it will only continue to demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And, simultaneously divisions and simultaneously unity between, regular citizens and Native Americans. Tactical terror from how nature wants us to have that. It needs us to have that. And that's our founders, because our founders told us to be led by nature when they told us to get the Constitution unabridged and why and how we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them. And how it's worded that way. Many bread, vaccines. So all kinds of behavior racketeering where they're putting people fake behavior at locations that are filmed 24/7. They're putting fake ties and fake natures of ties to kids and to adults at campuses of all ages and natures, including fire campuses and medical campuses. So increasingly people involved with the intelligence community since they were kids, they've been locked to self-valued roles with all sides of criminal and civil cases and the interbranch names, putting the same sequence shifts, same collusion /S with news at the same time, increasingly roles with predicate acts with facts from past stories, one's active and planting evidences for things to come, where and how the breaching method used and uses the intelligence company, the intelligence communities, and their differences here and there, where they were shared. Russians and Americans were shared here by worse than just internationally monitored conversations that are involved in Russia, America, and in Ukraine, with the fact-checking nature, torture, extortion, and slavery of every person in every country, modern country, too. We have been systems tactical ulterior from the human body of individual body system, again, with all group differences being generated by that hyper invisible but still discernible. See, but we have nature shows replaced and critical in the value of that for how nature uses these words too. Again, hyper native ways. So how could we afford? You guys, you can't even explain how Native Americans were pushed onto reservations. How that simultaneously was to help them too, but like it was to help people to push them north and south to fight against slavery. But also, there's still roles with it, still hiding what really forced the Americans. James Madison, they had to force. There are proofs that they had to even counter-extort George Washington and force him to be our president. But he agreed because it was about the Constitution unabridged and how and why we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them. But we're supposed to be honest about how everyone had roles, everyone's syntax in nature, had an extent of collusion / S against everyone else. Otherwise, that body would be sensed. This is a method that had been perfected since before modern religious messengers were born. And there are proofs that then until now, then in other words, they had to put the cipher with deciphered. But see, you guys aren't allowing honesty with the reading of books, and you aren't allowing sanity with it. And you guys are using, having heard only having heard used the knowledge of good and evil, for example, of the back parts of and out of sequence of the Old Testament and of the Quran, for example, with using passions and emotions dishonestly, tactically, delusions raw. You guys can't be honest three ways about the part that says only defend right here in the Old Testament, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part before it. You guys can't be honest about the part that comes after it, with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Adam and Eve, and their generation, and what that's about. So you can't be honest about the part after it too, because that's about knowledge of good and evil. How can you be honest about that if you deny the significance and the value of what? How could you be honest about knowledge of good and evil and insidious criminally foreign influence uses of it / hyper-criminally foreign influence uses of it, when you guys can't be honest about where it says the names of the people and why it says the names of the people of the sciences will come together? Nature shows us that it communicates with a species body system. We are a human species body of individual bodies. And the same thing generating all group differences. We have ignored its system, though. So all truths and things like that are used as tactical terror than how, in subject treatment. But in other words, we are in a semi-ancient trap. Forgiveness is because there is means to discern it. There's a breaching method, and there are collusions that A through Z have, and delusions, where anyone who tries to address how we have black pupils or whites of eyes, and that's means to discern how criminally foreign influence, tactically, delusions raw. Summary convictions by American history are being and have been made to us. And that is exploited by people informally, where they have formally people too roles, including where they're forcing each age of humanity to go to campuses. And the campuses, this is with databases and then further at the ones at campuses. All that collusion there, and because of first collusion / S with all locations / S with what nobody wanted. Nobody wants before anyone wants to understand why and how the ocean is polluted, the whole entire ocean. No one wants that. There are exceptions made because we have been value nature systems forced to be value nature systems. See, but where it is forced, all truths are used for lies. So more and more, the breaching method measured and maintained its roles with wars, its roles with revolutions. It replaced the communications of James Madison, of our founders, has self-valued roles with uses of their words, styles, needs in nature. Well, saying, well, that's all we have is their words. It's not true. They declassified about their words. They didn't have free speech, and everyone with speech was forced an extent of collusion / S against everyone else. Who denies that is going to have inherent too active, too progressive, too. Their logic, nature, and reason, the same thing. / S. So please, follow mandated law. Don't follow, in other words, get them on paper, one name and sequence. And don't pretend it's personal, Weatherfield Police. You guys did good with the confessions regarding but some of them were halfway confessions. You guys different natures of sick people involved too. with the retired police chiefs, with like a police chief Cintron, also involved with people from Puerto Rico, recorded with that name Cintron, involved with wire mail crime, all kinds of natures of drugs and medicines crimes with child offenders and medical families, involved with the same house slash S, involved with falsified police reports with them, wire crime acts and methods, and they're switching and forging names. They have a whole bunch of police departments involved with the people named Cololo and O'Brien and Smith. Hey, let's get them on paper, one name and sequence, the police. They're bringing this up too. In other words, I mind my business. These are people intercities with my campuses, planting evidences, and people affecting confessions to me intercities. We're not going to leave it out because they make subject treatments. They can't make one subject treatment right. That's why they put fake conversations with me since I was a kid, including with the news at the same time with the interbranch. Let's get them on paper. Please get Judge Napolitano. Make sure he hears about this because they've been changing and faking digital evidences too on and off the campuses and all natures of crime scenes. Here, we're gonna get the Wethersfield police. Where's this Joshua Schumack? Watch what they've been involved with, the Schumack family and people tied to them. Fear God now to hide and plot.